Right. Thank
Okay.
you. Perfect.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Eduardo. All right, let's start then. First, with some breathing meditation. Okay. Let's start then. Visualize in the space in front of you an embodiment of the Dharma, of all the methods to attaining liberation. Buddha Shakyamuni, who appears as a fully ordained monk with a body made of golden light. And it's inseparable from your Lama or your Lamas. Seated in a full lotus posture, which indicates the unwavering strength of his concentration. And with his right hand in the earth-touching gesture, which signifies the Buddha's great control over all interferences and negativities. And with his left hand resting in his lap in the meditation gesture, which indicates that the Buddha realizes all phenomena. Holding a begging bowl, his face is radiant and inspiring, reflecting his great compassion and wisdom. And then visualize that all around you, wherever there's some space, there are sentient beings quietly sitting, in the form of a human being, so think that you're actually surrounded by all sentient beings. And remember what they're going through. enduring endless different sufferings. Completely confused in what creates suffering and what makes them happy. And completely under the control of their afflictions. To generate affectionate love towards each and every one of them. A sense of closeness, no matter who they are. An acceptance of their shortcomings. And a deep sense of care, as if they were your own children. Which they definitely were at some point in the past. In a past life. Focus in particular on all their unwanted experiences, problems, difficulties, and other forms of dukkha or dissatisfaction. And generate great compassion, focusing on all sentient beings without excluding even a single being. And aspiring from the depth of your heart, wishing from the depth of your heart for them to be free from any dissatisfactory experience and its causes. And not just that, the wish may, I personally, be able to lead them to a state that is free from any dissatisfaction, from any unwanted experience. To really feel that from the depth of your heart. And allow for that wish to grow stronger. Become a determined type of awareness. Become the altruistic attitude. That is determined to do whatever is necessary to lead sentient beings towards a state of lasting satisfaction and lasting inner peace. Since that's realistically only possible once we become enlightened ourselves, let's generate the mind of enlightenment, the aspiration to become fully enlightened for the welfare of each and every sentient being. And it's also with that kind of mind that we continue to study fundamental wisdom, motivated by that wish to become enlightened, the benefit of others. And then let's reinforce it with a prayer. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. Okay, so we'll start with the Lamrim again. Oh yeah, there we go. Lamrim outlines. Can you see the outlines? Yeah, great. All right, refuge it is. So, having gone through the previous topics, appreciating the opportunity we have with this precious human existence, appreciating it, not wasting it, but also being aware of its, well, impermanence, and that at any point in time we could lose it. We could lose this opportunity, and of course then be reborn in a state that is less fortunate, with less opportunities. And now we focus on, well, getting prepared, not just for this life, not just focus on the well-being of this life, which of course is also essential, but also prepare for the future by way of focusing on the next topic, which is taking refuge. All right. And so, as you're all aware, these practices are only common to a person of lower spiritual capacity or lower spiritual interest, if you like. So someone who's only interested in future happiness, future well-being within cyclic existence, well, the practices prescribed to such a person, for such a person by the Buddha, we engage in the same practices. So they're common to a person who's interested in the universal vehicle, in the enlightenment, of all sentient beings, and for that purpose, our own enlightenment. So we still need to go through the fundamental practices, and we start, therefore, here with taking refuge, having prepared our mind with the other topics. So taking refuge as the superior gateway for entering the Dharma. Okay. So what does that actually mean, taking refuge? I think in the West, it's easily misunderstood. Maybe because of the term that is used, taking refuge, or to use the Tibetan word, kind of like going for protection. But actually, we do this all the time, in every minute of our day. I mean, taking refuge, seeking a solution to our problems, seeking a way of releasing or finding relief from our problems. So we've done this, of course, when we were little, when we hurt ourselves, when we had I don't know, we're hungry and so forth, we would seek refuge in our parents. We would seek out our parents and ask them to help us. Now, in everyday life, I mean, we're bound to experience problems. There is just no way. It's totally unrealistic to hope for lasting happiness in cyclic existence, in the existence we're in right now. And so still, we keep seeking happiness with this kind of instinctive sense it's going to be lasting. It's going to last if I just had that job, if I just had that relationship, if I had that piece of clothing and so forth. So somehow our wishes to gain this, that, and the other seems to suggest if I had that, everything would be okay. But of course, as we all know, for long, something else arises. We may get bored with what we actually achieved, or even without that happening, we may lose it, or other wishes, other desires arise, and we're never satisfied, and we always experience problems and so forth. So usually, since we always, on a daily basis, I mean, just getting up in the morning, the first problem is we feel drowsy and tired and seek refuge in that cup of coffee or cup of tea. And then we feel hungry. So there's the discomfort, or maybe even the suffering of feeling hungry. And again, we seek refuge in food. And then it's cold outside, so we seek refuge in clothing. So in the sense, we're always seeking relief from an unwanted experience. And that is really what seeking refuge entails. It's not all that it is, but that is one of the main kind of meanings of the word taking refuge. So when we say we take refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, well, actually, we mainly take refuge in the Dharma. And that's not to say when we feel crappy, we have a bad day, and take refuge in a bar of chocolate or in watching a movie. It's not saying we're not allowed to do that, but to also seek refuge mainly in the Dharma, which are really basically psychological means to overcome problems, to overcome unwanted experiences. So the Dharma is really a method, or it's more than a method, it's many methods. It's this system of many different methods that are applied in certain situations to overcome short-term problems, or of course, more importantly, long-term problems, or like temporarily overcome problems and overcome problems for good. So in the sense that if I have a problem, if on a daily basis, for instance, I'm at work and I have a conflict with a colleague, well, of course, I may still, like I said, eat that bar of chocolate or meet a friend to just vent and tell them about the problems I have and feel better after that. But at the same time, also check, what does the Dharma offer me in this situation? How can I deal with this colleague who gives me such a hard time, with this obnoxious person? How can I deal with this person? So there are very, very extensive explanations on trying to understand the other person, trying to understand all the causes and conditions that give rise to the situation, including my actions of the past. But most importantly, when it comes to understanding, love, compassion, and so forth, to also try and put ourselves into the other person's shoes and so forth. There's so many techniques. So applying them is taking refuge in the Dharma. And so when we say take refuge in the Dharma, we sometimes, or we take refuge in general, we think it's just reciting this prayer that we recited before class. But that is just, it's just the words, reciting the words, while mentally, hopefully, if we're doing it in the right way, opening ourselves towards the Dharma, in the sense, mainly the Dharma. I mean, the Buddha, of course, is the person teaching the Dharma, the Sangha as those practicing the Dharma, but mainly those methods, those techniques to overcoming problems, to have that in the back of our mind. So reciting the prayer, ideally 3 times in the mornings, 3 times in the evening, and then in between, if there's a class and so forth, just to remind us, when something arises, can I find a solution in the Dharma? So that is really the first step. And it's not about being weak and not being able to live your life. I mean, we don't live as independent entities. We always need to depend on others, on other situations, and so forth. So seeking therefore refuge in these methods, well, there's nothing wrong with that. That is really the first step. And the reasons, as it says here, for taking refuge, they're twofold. There's the dread or the caution. Sometimes it's translated as fear. It's like this dread of regarding suffering. I mean, in the unfortunate states, like being reborn in a lower realm, but just in daily life, just dreading unwanted experiences. And there's a good reason for that, because our mind naturally wishes to have pleasant experiences, peaceful experiences. And so it has the right to have those experiences, and therefore dreading unwanted experiences. Based on that, we seek refuge. That's one cause. And then the conviction or the confidence that the triple gem, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, have the ability to show us how to overcome this problem. Fortunately, they can't take it away from us, but they show us the medicine, they show us the means to overcome it. So our usual seeking refuge on our daily basis, we seek refuge all the time, as I said, it's like taking a painkiller. But turning towards the Dharma is a means to find a solution, a lasting solution to this problem. So there's nothing wrong with taking a painkiller, but of course, if in the long time we want to overcome these unwanted experiences, these dissatisfactory experiences, we turn towards Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And so refuge should be ever present. This mind, like, oh, I've got a problem. What does the Dharma teach me? What are the methods? And of course, to have that conviction, the confidence, and the ability of the 3 gems or the 3 jewels, in order to generate that, we need to have certain knowledge of the Dharma. That's why studying the Dharma, reflecting on the Dharma is so important. But also, of course, then when we take refuge in a situation, to know, oh, this is appropriate in this situation. This is what I need to do now. Here is where I just need to retreat, get away from the situation. I cannot control my emotions right now. Just retreat for some time being and deal with it while being distant, for instance, being away from that person, as an example. Or right now, patience is needed. Or at this point, love and compassion are needed. I need to reflect on the fact this person doesn't exist inherently, and so forth. So again, of course, an understanding of the Dharma is the basis, which is why we study this text. Okay, one of the reasons. All right, so that should be enough. So please focus on refuge, focus on the 2 causes, the dread of regarding suffering. I mean, we all have that, but just get in touch with that, your own dread. And of course, conviction and confidence of the Dharma being able to help you. And then get a sense, that's what refuge really refers to. And is it worth it or not? Is this a type of mind, the mind that takes refuge, that we want to have at all times? I mean, not active at all times, but kind of lingering or kind of dormant at least, so that when a situation arises, the Dharma is right there at all times. You can apply it at all times. Okay, great. So that is just for your practice this coming week. And then the next step, I want to do next is I want to introduce what Jimmy prepared. So he did a great job to create this glossary or to put together these keywords that we've covered so far. But not only did he collect these keywords or these Dharma terms we've been using, and this is a work in progress, so of course more words need to be added. But what else he did was, and this is great, he it kind of got a little bit lost with me now tempering with his handout. So I would request him to kind of do what he did before, in the sense of, like, I don't even know what the technical term is, kind of connect all these words with the different websites. You can still see when you click here, it takes you to Christian Steinert's dictionary, which is a very good dictionary, an online dictionary, which brings together many dictionaries that are available, for instance, as an Apple app. And then you've got Alex Berzin's glossary, but even more important, his explanation. So he sometimes uses different vocabulary, which is, it might be quite different from what is ordinarily used by other translators but that's why here you can see that oftentimes Jimmy also mentions, well, not in all cases, but here, for instance, he mentions Alex Berzin's term. And if you know the term he uses in this case, well, you can go to the explanation and find out what Alex Berzin explains, because his website is really amazing. It's such a great source. So many different explanations he gives on different topics. Anyway, so you can see this still works. You're able to, it still takes you to the websites, but with some of the words, I changed them, it doesn't happen. So with wisdom, that still happens. I put the Sanskrit first. Jimmy had the Sanskrit second, so I put it first because that was the original language. The middle way, so I added the Sanskrit term. And here, these are just 4 terms with the extreme of non-existence and the extreme of nihilism being equivalent. He had, for the extreme of non-existence, he had the extreme of nihilism, but strictly speaking, there's a different word for the extreme of nihilism and the extreme of non-existence. So anyway, it's not even necessary to have all 4, but since he mentioned some of them, I mentioned them as well. And as far as I had, when I found the Sanskrit, I added it when there were a lot of choices in Sanskrit and I didn't know which one was the right one in that context, I just left it out. For instance, here, the word continue. There are 2 words in Tibetan. It can be gun and it can be gu. But the Sanskrit, there are too many options and I didn't want to add all of them because I'm totally in the dark about when to use which term. Also, an important word is, of course, inherent existence, a word in Tibetan, Ranshinge Truba. Here you've got the Wiley, Ranshinge Truba. So that is the word Nagarjuna mainly uses. Jimmy also said in one of his comments, he would rather I use words such as objective existence and existence as being merely labeled and not existing in and of itself and so forth. I'm trying to do that as I explain, but since Nagarjuna mainly uses this term, Ranshinge Truba, here, Ranshinge Truba, I did the same. I used the translation inherent existence, but intrinsic existence works just as well. And J. Garfield uses essential existence, which is also a good translation, definitely. Inherent existence is just the more common term. All right. So far, I'll leave out this. I'll go back to this in a minute, but I'll just go through and finish this here. So designated phenomenon, that which is being labeled versus the basis of designation or the basis of labeling, the basis of imputation. You have these words, the designated phenomenon and the basis of designation. So these are important words. Alex Berson calls this one referent object. Anyway, so if you say, take for instance, a table is labeled on the basis of the surface of the table, the legs of the table, for instance. So the leg, the surface, that is the basis of designation, and the table itself is the designated phenomenon. It's that which is labeled on the basis of, well, the parts of the table. Okay, so that's an example, a designated phenomenon. The table, basis of designation, well, the different parts of the table. Okay, then you have basis, mental aspect, and those are all words that we've been using in the text. But one thing I just skipped were these words here, because Kelsey, she sent me a message about the fact that when I said apprehended object in the handout, well, according to her understanding, apprehended object and appearing object have the same meaning. And this is how it's described in certain texts. Now, this is a little bit complicated, and the irony of this is my intention was to make it a little simpler, but it turned out I made it even more complicated. So in the material, in the introductory material that I sent to you that we've already completed, in that material, I tried to give you just a simple kind of introduction to the fact when you have a consciousness, something appears to that consciousness and something is apprehended or perceived, something is perceived by that mind. So you have appearance and apprehending or perception. Now, in general, when you say an I consciousness apprehending a table, it's very clear. The main object is the table, just by way of the way it's formulated. Consciousness, mind, perceiving or apprehending table. Then the table, the table is the main object. It appears to that mind, and the mind perceives it, apprehends it. But as we've discussed before, a mind has more than just its main object. It also has secondary objects, if you like. Things that appear to a mind, but which the mind is not aware of, which the mind doesn't perceive. Or the mind may perceive something, but it doesn't appear to that mind. It's implicitly known. Now, this goes too much into Lorik. If you studied Lorik, you're probably aware of that. But anyway, what I wanted to do was to give you a sense of something appears to the mind. There's this aspect of the appearance and the aspect of the mind apprehending its object. But there is this difficulty. So I'm going to show you something, and I hope I don't confuse you more, but just to become more familiar with the terminology. Now, this I didn't send to you. It was necessary to send to you. But just to give you an idea of where these different translations come from. When we say the mind apprehends something, okay, do you have a Tibetan word? That's zimba. Zimba is the present tense. So to apprehend, to perceive, to hold, to grasp, that's the meaning of this word. And it's used accordingly. To hold something, you can use that word. But usually, this action, the activity of the mind to apprehend its object, to perceive its object, that's the word used. Okay? So, table, zimbe, shepa would be a mind that perceives a table. Shepa is consciousness, zimba is apprehend, and then table, you could hear the word table. All right, so a mind apprehending table. The word is there. It's used a lot when describing any type of mind. And it's got three tenses. Sungwa, zimba, sungwa, here with the silent b, with the silent g, but it's all the same root of zimba. And then this is not too complicated. Usually when you study Tibetan, you study these different tenses, just as you would in English. Sometimes some words change, know, knew, and so forth, to know, he knew, like I know, I knew, and so forth. So the tenses change, and with other words, they don't change. Same in Tibetan. Sometimes the three tenses are different, and sometimes they're the same. So in the case of this word, they're not the same. So then in Tibetan, you have these three terms, which all have the same root of apprehending. Songyul, Songweyul, and Zindangiyul. Okay. Now this word, Songyul, is usually, in many translations, translated as apprehended object. But you also find in the dictionary this translation, apprehendable object, something that can be apprehended. And that term here, Songyul, that is synonymous with appearing object. So in the literature on Lorik, on Pramana, in those texts, you find Songyul, or apprehendable object, and appearing object to be mentioned, to be synonymous, stressed again and again. And in many of the commentaries, that is taken on. Songweyul, last time I said, well, the apprehended object, you could say Songweyul. So I added the Tibetan with the Songweyul. But that's when we debated, some of our teachers would say, oh, there's a difference between the two. And sometimes when you debate it with someone, they drew this distinction. But really, this Songyul is just the abbreviated version of Songweyul. Actually. I mean, in most cases, when you have words with this grammatical kind of construction, it's if you take this away, then that would be the abbreviated version. So you see just this part, or I should not point towards the Tibetan here, be. When that is gone and you just you leave it out, then that's just the abbreviated version of this word here. So Songyul is just the abbreviated version of Songweyul. So it doesn't really make sense to draw a distinction. So apprehendable object. But then you have another word, Zindangiyul. And so now I've chosen that word, Zindangiyul. That's the word that I should put in brackets, which I already did, and brackets behind the word apprehended object. So it's a little confusing when some of the English translations talk about apprehended object, but they actually mean this here, Songyul, which, as I said, is synonymous with appearing object. But really, the object that the mind apprehends, that should really be called the apprehended object. It makes much more sense. Why would you talk about something that appears as an apprehended object? Because not everything that appears is apprehended. Therefore, it's an apprehendable object. Yes, it may be apprehended. It could be apprehended by a different mind, but it's not the apprehended object. So Zindangiyul, I think, is just so the word apprehended object should be used as a translation of this word. Okay. Now, for those of you who didn't ask me about it, you couldn't care less. I mean, unless you're interested in the Tibetan. But two people have already asked me. B has indirectly asked me about this term apprehended object. And now Kelsey was very clear in her message to me. Doesn't it say apprehended object? And here Songyul is the object she's really talking about. That is the same as appearing object. And my response to her was already, and I'm saying it now here on this occasion, that I don't think apprehended object is a good translation for this word, Songyul. It should be apprehendable object. And Zindangiyul, that should be apprehended object. The only reason this is not usually called that is that literally it means the mode of apprehension object. the object of the mode of apprehension, but that doesn't really make much sense. It's really just saying the apprehended object. So don't worry about what each syllable says. Its meaning is that which is being apprehended. Okay, I may have confused you even much more. I should have probably said right from the beginning, object of engagement, and be done with it. But yeah, well, maybe it still serves some purpose that I still explained it to you. Now, one last thing about this, is the following. Let me just go back to this file. Okay, so the introduction, the material I already gave to you, which we've completed, it has now slightly changed, which is on page 15, and I'll send it to Dalit to make available to you. So in the fundamental wisdom, in the introduction, I now call the apprehended object Zindangyul. I previously had Sonyul and Sumuyul, and that wasn't right. So I get a Sanskrit term, so apprehended object or object of engagement. So this is really what the mind apprehends, what the mind perceives. Okay, so despite all the confusing explanation with the words and so forth, if that was confusing to you, all you need to remember, apprehended object, object of engagement, that which the mind apprehends. And then, of course, you have the appearing object. And as I said before, the main object of the mind both appears and is apprehended, and is therefore the apprehended object of the mind. Okay, all right. So that should be enough. And of course, if we taught Lorik, there will be more details. If we learned Lorik, studied Lorik, it'd be different. But as you can see here, Lorik is really the basis. And if you haven't studied Lorik yet, well, I can only recommend it to do so. I can only recommend for you to do so. Anyway, okay, we're done with this card. Okay. Now, next comes this handout, this illustration, which I've been sending to you twice now, and I never went through it. Okay, so this is just something, this is an explanation, or it's an illustration of two types of causes. And it's important to know the distinction, the difference between what is called a substantial cause and a cooperative condition. Now, I couldn't find any other picture online of a gardener, and that just fit together. So I put together this kind of little drawing here. Okay, now I can no longer see everything. That's because I've got everyone here at the side. Okay, change that a little bit. Great. Okay, now to take and give you an example of, well, the usual example of a substantial cause and cooperative condition is the example of a seed. Here in this case, a sunflower seed, which then grows into a sunflower. Now, that is just an example that we can easily understand, but to remind you, every result, in other words, every impermanent phenomenon always has both, a substantial cause and a cooperative condition in general. There are some kind of passages where it talks about maybe sound being different, but it's debatable. So for now, leave out sound, leave out anything. In general, whatever is impermanent has arisen from a substantial cause and a cooperative condition. And so here, the seed is the substantial cause. The seed transforms into, it becomes the flower. The seed, here it's a sunflower seed, that transforms to become a flower. Okay, so if you think of the continuum, the sunflower as a continuum consisting of different moments, well, it was previously to being a sunflower, it was a sunflower sprout, and previous to that, there was a seed, and then previous to that, there was another substantial cause. So in that way, a substantial cause gives rise to a substantial result, and that in turn gives rise to another substantial result, and so forth, giving rise to a continuum. Okay, so something that is impermanent also always consists of a continuum, from moments of a former entity transforming into the present entity, and then that transforming into the next moment, and so forth. Taking yourself as an example, you as a person exist as a continuum, and you yesterday, so the person who you were yesterday is the substantial cause of who you are today, and then today's you is the substantial cause of tomorrow's you, and so forth. Okay, but in order for a substantial cause to give rise to a next moment or to a future substantial result, it needs cooperative conditions. Okay, so in the case of this substantial cause, the flower, well, it is assisted. That process of transformation, the seed transforms, it becomes the sunflower, and that process of transformation that is assisted, there's the cooperative assistance given by the conditions. So it's because of the sunlight, the warmth, the fertilizer, the water, even the gardener planting the seed. So they're all assisting the seed in the process of becoming the flower. Okay, so that's what it says here. So the seed is the substantial cause, and the water, the sun, the soil, the fertilizer, and the gardener, and there are other cooperative conditions, of course, but those are the main ones we can think of right now. They are the cooperative conditions of the flower. The seed transforms into the flower, while the water, the sun, the soil, and so forth assist the seed in the process of becoming the flower. Okay, so that is at the time of the cause, the seed, and the result is then the sunflower. Okay, so this is just an illustration of these two types of cause. Most of you probably know about them. If you have some background in Buddhism, you're familiar with that. But for those who are new, well, hopefully this illustrates this idea, and for those who already know about it, just to remind you. Okay, now this was a handout I wanted to, well, give to you, well, for 2 weeks now, but that wasn't the right time. But let's go back to the first chapter now. Okay, as you know, examination of conditions, the name of this chapter is examination of conditions. And here conditions also refers to causes, conditions, like anything that gives rise to something else. Let's examine that. How does something arise? As you remember last time, I talked about the fact that phenomena arise, they're dependently risen, impermanent phenomena arise in dependence on other phenomena, and let's now analyze those and analyze that these phenomena, in particular here with regard to the first chapter, well, it talks about the mode of existence, the emptiness of phenomena, not the self, but phenomena other than the self, by way of examining agency and action, so that which does something and the activity of doing so, so the cause that creates something, and this action of creating or arising, depending on what you're talking about. So the cause creates something, it produces something, that is the action of the cause, and the result, it arises. That is the action that goes along with the result. So we label the word creating, producing on the basis of the seed, and the sunflower that arises from the seed, based on that, we label it arises. So the action here is the arising of the sunflower. So therefore, with respect to cause and effect, this is the process we're looking at, what happens in that situation, and how come that this process that seems so concrete, when we understand it, very concrete, how come that process doesn't exist inherently? And of course, cause and effect, agency and action can also be applied to karma. That's also a type of cause and effect, an action, an agency that creates, what does it create? A future experience. And that future experience arises in dependence on its cause, a volitional action we performed. Okay, anyway, so the analysis is done here with the first verse. I'm not using J. Garfield's translation. I use this alternative translation. So what does Nagarjuna say? His first verse is things are not from itself, not from something different, not from both, and not without a cause. Does anything anywhere ever arise? Okay, you could say anything, just that's how it's usually spelled. But in Tibetan, it doesn't have so much the meaning of anything, but it's like any impermanent thing. There's no impermanent thing anywhere which ever arises from itself, from something different, from both, or without a cause. So, as we've heard last time, if something existed inherently, if there were inherent existence, if things existed inherently, they would also inherently arise. And if they were to inherently arise, there are only these four possibilities. They would arise from itself, from something inherently different, from both itself and something inherently different, or they would arise without a cause. Okay, now I'm trying to see you again. I want to see your faces to see at least if you're confused or not. Okay. All right, I can see some of you. And so just to be sure, if you look too confused, I'll repeat what I said early on. Okay. Great. So we went through this last time. And this reasoning, as it's presented here, things don't exist from themselves, they don't arise from themselves, from something different, and so forth. That's called the diamond sliver reasoning, as you've heard. And now let's look at this. It doesn't arise from itself. Now, as I've stressed again and again, what we're going through here, it should not be some kind of theory. It should not be something outside of yourself, but it's a case of discovering our own misperceptions, especially when we talk about wrong views or extreme views, which are always views that are not in accordance with reality. They are presented not to deal with, for instance, the Samkhya's, who are the philosophers who assert that things arise from itself. Buddhists are not interested in refuting the Samkhya view directed at the Samkhyas, because the Samkhyas have their own view. There's no need for refuting their view. They're probably not open to that kind of refutation anyway. They wouldn't agree with that. And so that's not the point. The point is that some of the views that the Samkhyas hold in a similar fashion, we also hold this view. And it's about discovering our extreme views of reality. It's all supposed to be very personal. That's what I keep stressing. If we can do this, of course, it's really difficult. It's almost like I'm asking you to hold like many different plates at the same time. You're trying to juggle all these objects at the same time. I'm asking you to understand something that is so complicated, using words that are so weird, like apprehended object. Who talks like that? Apprehendable object. So there's that challenge, understanding what's behind it, and then asking you, well, how does it concern you personally? Asking you to reflect on your own personal. So that's a lot to do at the same time. And you probably want to first focus on the terminology and trying to understand what's behind it. But if you've got the space of mind, if you've got the time, maybe when this is over, you go through the material again, if you have the time to do so and the interest, well, then to think, how does this apply to me? This is essential when you study the Dharma, to take it personally. in the sense of like, take it as a personal instruction, seeing how is this relevant to you. And there's always a way to make it relevant. Okay. Previously, I talked about refuge. I talked about apprehended object. Every time you perceive something, you apprehend something, you're aware of something, and something appears and something you're aware of, but we're not even aware of that. So it's really relevant to understand our mind better, to understand the object, what is apprehended, what appears. Okay, that's an example how you can apply what I discussed earlier. But now we're taking it to the level of dependent arising. Something arises, so the phenomena around us arise. Our mind arises again and again, moment by moment. A new type of consciousness arises that wasn't there yesterday, right? The mind is always changing, and a new consciousness arises. Well, how does it arise? Does it arise from itself, from something totally different, from both, or does it arise without a cause? Oftentimes we have a sense, it doesn't have a cause, it's just there. We have that sense. But we also have the first type. Okay, but let's first, so before we go back to, and I've already mentioned it last time, but I want to stress this one more time before we go to the next aspect. So first of all, here, we are very lucky to have the Samkhyas, a philosophical system that existed in India, that still exists in India, maybe in a slightly different form. But anyway, I think these assertions probably still hold. So they reflect this idea that things arise from itself, this extreme way. And last time I mentioned that this also actually can be applied to our own understanding, but in a slightly different way. But let me just quickly repeat what I said last time. So as I said, this is really from Lama Tsongkhapa's commentary, illuminating the intent. We actually studied this before we started this class, the class on the fundamental wisdom, where we also study, well, indirectly, we don't read the commentary by Lama Tsongkhapa, Ocean of Reasoning, but I'm trying to explain some of the points that Lama Tsongkhapa makes and kind of summarize them in this handout. But as I said previously, we studied Chandrakirti's Entry into the Middle Way, and together with that, we read Illuminating the Intent. So in that text, he gives this explanation, and it's almost formulated in the same way. I formulated it slightly differently, but it's almost the same. So the Samkhyas, and here the Samkhyas who don't exist, who don't accept the existence of a creator God. There are two types of Samkhyas: those who accept a creator God and those who don't. So here in particular, the ones who don't assert a creator God, they say that a result, such as a sunflower, arises from causes, substantial causes, and cooperative conditions, causes and conditions that are pervaded by a single primal substance. So they talk about this primal substance that pervades everything, right? There is some similarity to Buddhism in a way, like emptiness, right? It pervades everything, but it's not the same way in which they talk about this primal substance. This primal substance is kind of like, it's present in the same way in everything. Emptiness is not in the same way. I mean, the emptiness of a flower is not the emptiness of a table. It's just that they share this lack of inherent existence, but we're not saying the same emptiness is present in everything. The Samkhyas say that this primal substance that is present in everything. And so from the primal substance, not in everything, but in a lot of impermanent phenomena. So the impermanent phenomena around us, such as a sunflower seed, that is pervaded by this primal substance. So therefore, the nature of the substantial cause of a sunflower seed, as an example, would be of the same nature as the cooperative conditions, water, warmth, and so forth. They're all part of the same nature, that primal substance. And that also applies to the nature of the sunflower. So the sunflower, its causes and conditions, they're all of the same nature. The nature is all the same. It's that primal substance. So they're all inextricably linked, by being of one nature. That is their assertion. And so as they accept that the sunflower seed and the sunflower are not the same, they don't say they're identical. They're not saying that the sunflower arises from the sunflower itself, which seems arising from itself. That term seems to suggest, right? They're not saying the sunflower rises from the sunflower. No. Nevertheless, when they assert that the sunflower arises from its seed and from its own nature, because the seed and the cause of the seed and the sunflower itself, they're the same nature, because they say they're the same, the natures are the same, then what follows is that the sunflower must arise from its own nature. It must arise from something that is the same nature as itself. And if something is of the same nature as the sunflower, well, whenever that something exists, the sunflower must exist. So if the sunflower seed is the same nature as the sunflower, then at the time of the sunflower, you must have the sunflower, because they're of the same nature. And if something is of the same nature as the sunflower, it must exist at the same time. Okay. So the sunflower must therefore exist at the time of its seed, because the sunflower and its seeds are of one nature. Okay. And so since we can't see the sunflower, it must be there in a non-manifest way. And in that way, the view of the Samkhyas, if you were to discuss it with them, and that's what happened at the time of Nagarjuna, for instance, at Nalanda University, Samkhya scholars and scholars of the different philosophical, non-Buddhist philosophical systems and the Buddhists, they came together there and they exchanged their views. So that was basically the assertion of the non-theistic ones who don't believe in a creator God. Those Samkhyas would say, well, yeah, the seed and the sunflower, they're all of the same nature. They all arise from this primal substance. And so they're all of the same nature, which it follows, therefore, the sunflower is the same nature as that seed. So the sunflower must exist at the time of its seed, because they're of one nature, must exist at the same time. And since there's no sunflower visible, well, it must be there in a non-manifest manner. Okay, I explained that last time only superficially. Now the challenge is, do we hold a similar view? I'm just repeating what I said last time. But in a way, there's a sense that the sunflower seed has the potential to give rise to the sunflower. It doesn't have the potential to give rise to a rose, for instance. So there's some potential. There's some potential in this seed that is different to the potential of, I don't know, a rose flower. Well, it's not a seed, but whatever, what else arises? A barley sprout, for instance. If you have a barley seed, that has the potential to give rise to a barley sprout, but it doesn't have the potential, the barley seed doesn't have the potential to give rise to the sunflower sprout. So there's some sunflower potential. There's something already in the seed. And that's the sense we have of phenomena. There's some concrete sunflowerness somehow already in there. So in a certain way, that seems to suggest that there's already the sunflower present. I mean, it's not really how we think, but there's some similarity when it comes to the potential. Anyway, having said all that, now let's look at why, in particular, the view of the Samkhyas that the sunflower is present in the seed, how it doesn't make sense. All right. And it's done, the refutation is done by way of demonstrating the logical absurdities or the consequences if that were the case. All right. So if they were really the same nature, if a sunflower existed at the time of the sunflower seed in that manner I just described, it would follow that there would be no point for the sunflower to arise again. It's already there. Okay. If the sunflower were to exist already because it's of the same nature as the seed. And if something is of the same nature as the seed, it must exist at that time. So if the samkhya said that the sunflower is already present, why would it have to arise again? There's no purpose, because the purpose of a phenomenon's arising is for it to attain its identity as that phenomenon. Okay, so that's just what's explained here. So it arises as a sunflower. That's the purpose of arising, to become that phenomenon. However, if this identity as a sunflower in this case has already been attained, there's no need for it to arise again. Okay, makes sense. If the samkhya, and so this is this hypothetical debate that's usually described, and maybe it took place really, where the samkhya to reply that it's not contradictory for something to have attained its identity and still have to arise again, the following absurd consequence would ensue. It would follow that arising would be endless, right? So it wouldn't be, the sunflower wouldn't just arise once for its identity to come into existence, for it to come into existence as a sunflower. No, it would arise again and again, because it doesn't matter, it's there already or not. It could just arise again and again, right? It wouldn't make sense. Previously, it was just for something to arise that wasn't there before, therefore you need the sunflower. But then if it was there already and still it arises, well, then you could say it arises again and again and again, endlessly. Why? Because according to the samkhya, although the sunflower has already attained its identity at the time of its seed, it's already a sunflower, there's already a sunflower, it arises again. And another reasoning that is presented usually in the scriptures, especially by Chandrakirti, he is more, presents this more extensively, but also Bhava Viveka and Buddha Palita. So if the sunflower were to arise again and again, then that would also be true for the sunflower seed. It would also arise, right? It arises before the sunflower. It would also arise again and again. The seed, the sunflower seeds would arise again and again, because the sunflower seed would likewise already exist at the time of its cause. And just as the sunflower would arise again and again, the sunflower seed would also arise again and again. And if the sunflower seed were to arise again and again and again and again, even if it was there already, it would arise again and again, the sunflower would never be produced, because actually a sunflower can only arise when its seed has stopped to exist. But if the seed keeps coming and coming and coming, there will never be a time when the sunflower comes. Okay? But as an endlessly arising sunflower, if it never ceases, well, there's never a time when the sunflower comes. So these are just some of the arguments presented here. If you read it slowly at your own pace, it'll hopefully make sense, right? This absurdity that would arise, and there are other absurdities, of course. Anyway, to this, the samkhya might reply, well, the sunflower exists in a non-manifest form at the time of its seed, right? Like the illustration seems to suggest here. And I don't know whether the samkhya will illustrate it in that way. Like I said last time, that's how I looked at it. So it's kind of somehow a non-manifest sunflower is already present in this. And this is also how, for instance, Dharmakirti seems to think of it. Because if you remember, in the second chapter of Dharmakirti's Pramanavartika, His Holiness actually taught it this year. And so he read through the text, and depending on which translation you followed, you probably heard one of the verses. It says, if this were the case, the samkhya view were true, then it would follow that if an ant, a little insect ant, were to be reborn as an elephant in its next life, that would mean the ant is therefore the cause of the future elephant. It precedes it, it's the substantial cause. That ant, it's not the body of the ant, but mainly the mind, but it's still you have the being ant that becomes, in the end, an elephant, right? So just as you today become you tomorrow, although the body is not exactly the same and the mind is not exactly the same, but there's a continuum. So in the same way as I become tomorrow's me, in the same way, if an ant is reborn as an elephant in their next life, the ant is the cause of the future elephant. And if the elephant were already present, if that were the case, if it was like the Samkhya idea, like dealing with that Samkhya idea, that would mean the elephant would sit on the tip of a grass, the tip of some grass. So on the tip of a grass, of a piece of grass, you would have an elephant because you have an ant, and the elephant would be present in that ant. So you have an elephant sitting on that grass. This is what Dharmakirti says in the second chapter of the Pramanavartika. Now, if you read through it quickly, you probably miss it, but it's also usually explained in many of the commentary. This example of the ant and the elephant is given. So that's the idea that's where it also took this idea that if the elephant had arisen from itself, that is, were present already in a non-manifest fashion in the ant, which would then give rise to this absurdity of where the ant sits, you would have an elephant. Well, in the same way, you can apply this here to the flower, the sunflower being present in the sunflower seed. Okay. But as we've heard, it doesn't make sense. Why would it arise again? But also, the Samkhyas, they might reply, well, but actually we're saying the sunflowers, they're in a non-manifest form. We don't say it's there in a manifest form. It's in a non-manifest form. What does that even mean? You can't see it, kind of. It's there, but you can't see it. Okay, at the time of its seeds. And since it must arise to become manifest, there's no need for further arising once it has manifested. That seems to make sense. Okay, so it doesn't have to rise again and again and again endlessly, because it was non-manifest first, and then it became manifest. But this reply cannot really rebut, it cannot really refute the previous logical absurdities, because it leads to the following argument. If the sunflower were to exist at the time of its seed, even in a non-manifest form, it would not need to arise, for it had already arisen. And if it were to arise despite existing, infinite arising would ensue. It would still happen, right? It would still be, either it's there or it's not there, even non-manifest. But you have to decide it's there or it's not there. That's the whole point. Are you saying it is there? Is there a sunflower? Well, then it doesn't need to arise again. That's it. So this is the Buddhist argument. If, on the other hand, the Samkhyas were to say that the manifest sunflower did not exist at the time of its seed, they would be abandoning their original position. And thus the view that something can only arise if it already existed at the time of its cause. That is, if it's of its same nature, if it's of the same nature. Okay. Now, I tortured you through this explanation. It's not that easy, but I cannot see any other way to at least explain this idea of having arisen from itself. We did go through it when we studied entry into the middle way, but since it's mentioned so many times, and I spare you the debate between Buddha Palita and Chandrakirti, we don't need to go through that. We went through it last time when you studied this. But just to get the sense, if something is already there, it doesn't need to arise again. That's the main message behind this. All right. Okay, so I've given you a lot of information, but I want to start, before we start to debate, to meditate, I want to briefly start with the next extreme way of something arising. So if things were to arise really inherently in and of themselves, so in other words, if the way things appear to us, concrete, over there, objectively, totally independent of any labeling, if they really existed in that way, then things would also arise in that way. So when we say something is created by a cause or something arises from a cause, it would happen over there, totally independently over there. And if that were true, either it would arise from itself, right? It could something that's of the same nature, that is not different, or it would arise from something that is totally different. And that's the second possibility. So arising from something else, or for something distinct from itself, which means to arise from an inherently different cause. Who asserts this? Most Buddhist philosophers assert this. Okay, most Buddhist philosophers. This shows us it's so difficult to understand. It's really just the Prasangika who asserts that this is impossible. So who asserts it? It's asserted by Buddhist philosophical schools, all Buddhist philosophical schools, other than the Prasangika. Okay, so the Prasangika view, that's on the view of the Prasangika, the fundamental wisdom is based. But inherent existence is asserted by Vaibhashika, Sautrantika, Chittamatra, and Sautrantika Madhyamika school. All assert inherent existence. So according to these philosophical systems, because all phenomena exist inherently, objectively, and from their own side, because otherwise they can't exist, a result such as the sunflower arises from an inherently different cause, the sunflower seed. And as we see next time, and I'm not going to go into this now, if that were the case, if that were really true, then there would be no connection between this seed and this flower, because they would be inherently different. They would not be different just on the basis of labeling, conventionally different, but totally independently. There would be no connection between them. And I didn't know how else to illustrate that. So I just cut this arrow into two, because that's showing the connection between the two. So really there wouldn't be any connection between them. And that reflects our own view. So even though we may at times have a sense, yeah, there's already some sunflowerness in the seed, which would take us towards this assertions of arising from itself, our main misperception is our sense that everything exists in and of itself. There's this objective world out there waiting to be discovered. And that a seed and a sprout that I've never planted, a seed that I never planted, that it just does its own thing. In and of itself, it arises as a sunflower. It's got nothing to do with my mind, or any other mind, just does its thing, and my mind just happens to perceive that. That is our sense of reality. That's just not true. Okay, so that takes us to inherent existence, and that's how far I want to go today. Okay, so I don't think I need to recapture. I don't need to summarize what we've gone through today, because I pretty much also summarized what we did last time. All I want to stress again, what I find so important, is to discover or to check, is there in any way any of these views that reflect your own view? So this was in particular important with the view of the Samkhyas, or the sense that there's already something there. Let me just check there's someone wrote something in the chat. I can't see the chat now. And of course, in particular now with the view of inherent existence that we also have. So to check again, where is your own sense of inherent existence? That needs to be, of course, we need to get in touch with that, in particular with regard to this reasoning here. Anyway, okay. So that's enough for next time. And one last thing. I didn't give you any new material because I gave a lot of material. I think it goes up to page 9. So there's actually plenty of material for next class. I did prepare another, I think 3 or 4 pages, but I'm still working on them. So as soon as I'm done, of course, I'll make them available to you. So you'll have the opportunity to maybe read in advance to be prepared, or be better prepared for class. Okay. So let's leave it at that. and start to meditate. So be sure you're comfortable, back is straight, you're not in pain. And then start off with just focusing on the breath before I start to guide you through the meditation. Now, try to get a sense of your perception of reality. How do things appear to your mind? Is there a sense there's this external reality that we just happen to perceive as we go through life? Reality that is not dependent on our mind. Reality that does not depend on our mind or any other mind labeling it. And that we may label good, bad, big, small, and so forth, only because it is already in and of itself good, bad, big, small, and so forth. Well, if that were the case, if things existed that way, they would not arise in dependence, they would arise independently. Would arise inherently. That is, their arising would not be merely labeled, but be findable objectively and intrinsically over there. Not just that, but also if something existed or were to arise inherently, it would arise either from itself, from something inherently different, from both itself and something inherently different, or as a fourth possibility, it would arise without any cause. There is no fifth possibility. Now, can you recognize within yourself, within your own mind, sense that potential of the sunflower as an example? It seems to exist very concretely in the sunflower seed. But not in a mustard seed or sesame seed. While at the same time, isn't there a sense that the sunflower seed is so different from the flower it gives rise to? that their difference is not merely labeled, but exists inherently. And objectively. So in a way, our mind is able to accommodate different extreme views based on our root misperception of reality. On one hand, there's a concrete sunflower potential present in its seed. A kind of sunflowerness. While at the same time, the seed and the sunflower are perceived as objectively different. So now to conclude your short reflection, by stabilizing meditation, focus on whatever insight has arisen in your mind. Focus on just that. Allow yourself for that insight to go deeper. And then let's dedicate whatever positive potential we accumulated together. Learning, reflecting, and meditating on the actual mode of arising. First of all, towards our own enlightenment, thinking, may this become a cause for us to become fully enlightened for the welfare of all sentient beings. let's also dedicate a positive potential towards our lamas, great spiritual masters. May this cause them to have a extremely long and healthy, strong life. Continue to guide us through their example and through their teachings. And may our positive potential, in particular, help those who are sick, like Geshe Punso, Hallelujah, and everyone else suffering from sickness, from pain, so forth. May they all quickly recover, quickly get better. May their symptoms soon subside. And not just those who are physically sick, but also for those who are mentally sick. May their illness soon get better, and may they find inner peace. And so with this in mind, let's recite the dedication prayers. Just read them. Through the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. In a land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All powerful Chinrezig Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. Thank you very much. Yes, so I'll send you a new version of the introductory material, the slight changes that I've made. I'll send the words, the keywords that Jimmy prepared. I'll send it to Dalit for her to pass them on to Jimmy, who then please make a file from it so that we can all use it in such a way that you have the links kind of attached to the words. And of course, as soon as I'm done with the new material, I'll send that to you. So in the meantime, have a great week, and I see you again next Monday. Thank you.
Thank you, Geshima.
Thank
you.
Thank you, Geshima.
Thank you. Okay.
Bye.
And
Okay.